Okay, so let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are diving deep today into one of the most, truly anticipated sequels in recent romance history. We're talking about Rachel Reid's The Long Game.
The follow-up, the one everyone was waiting for.
Exactly. This is the continuation of that decade-long, secret, high-stakes love story between the hockey stars Shane Hollander and Ilya Rozanov from the Game Changer series.
And this isn't just a surface look. We have a really powerful stack of sources for you today. There's an intimate author interview that gets into Reid's actual intent.
Oh, that's good.
And on top of that, a detailed joint review and analysis from three very highly respected critics in the genre.
So our mission today is to really synthesize the true depth of this sequel. We're talking narrative choices, the character evolution, and some surprisingly powerful themes. We want to give you a comprehensive shortcut to understanding why this book was such a pivotal moment for the series.
And if you were one of the many, many readers wondering what happened after that initial secret happily ever after in Heated Rivalry,
then this deep dive is for you. This is your shortcut to all the crucial and I think surprising details.
So let's ground ourselves in the context. The Long Game came out in the spring of 2022.
Right.
And it was pretty clear from the very beginning that the author she felt compelled to tell this story.
It wasn't just fan service.
Not at all. Rachel Reid noted that the need to write more about Shane and Ilya, it began the minute she finished the first book.
Mm-hmm.
That's what led to this full-length sequel.
I find that so compelling. It signals that this wasn't just some, cash grab sequel. It was driven by a genuinely unfinished character arc, and the author was very clear about the shift in focus.
Precisely. She recognized that the first book, Heated Rivalry, was fundamentally more of a Shane book. It was all about his journey to self-acceptance, his security, and his sexuality.
Right.
But The Long Game, she stated, was always intended to be more of an Ilya book. The explicit goal was to dig deep into how Ilya was adjusting 3 years on to their arrangement and his new life.
And you can see that shift reflected perfectly in how the characters themselves would supposedly describe the book. When asked, Shane, the meticulous, private, slightly anxious one,
That's him.
he would call a book about himself thorough, intrusive, and embarrassing.
Which is, it's spot on for his personality. But I have to challenge that a little bit. If we know Shane is hyper-private, isn't calling a book about him embarrassing exactly what we'd expect? Does it actually tell us anything new?
That's a fair point. Maybe it signals that while he's grown, he hasn't lost that fundamental core of privacy. It's like the sequel forces him to confront things he would still rather keep hidden. It shows the emotional cost.
And that contrast with Ilya is what makes it so sharp. Ilya, who, he wears his heart on his sleeves, he describes the book as just long, hot, and good.
Simple.
So simple. It reflects his emotional honesty, his focus on the visceral experience of the relationship, not Shane's anxiety about exposure.
It sets the stage so well. Oh, and before we move on, there's one small detail from that author interview that really stuck with me.
What's that?
She mentioned the sequel cover, how it was intentionally designed as an evolution of the original. The first cover showed tension and longing, but this new one depicts them as united and in love and possibly looking to the future.
A true visual representation of their status shift.
Exactly.
And just a quick note for any listener wanting to jump in here. The sources were unanimous.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to read Heated Rivalry first. It's non-negotiable.
And they also said Role Model is highly recommended.
Yes, because the timeline of The Long Game actually overlaps with major plot points in that book, and it creates a much, much richer experience for you.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not starting at the beginning. We're jumping 3 full years into their secret lives.
Exactly. That initial high from the first book's ending, the commitment to love each other while keeping this decade-long thing a complete secret from everyone.
From friends, family, the league, everybody.
That high has curdled. The plan was to hide it until they both retired from pro hockey.
And our reviewers pointed out that 3 years later, that arrangement is, well, it's actively wearing on both men, but it's hitting Ilya dramatically harder.
Right. Shane's still playing for the Canadiens in Montreal. Ilya moved to Ottawa, so he's only 2 hours away. But proximity doesn't mean connection when the hockey season just demands total focus.
And that's the thing that separates a great sequel from a forgettable one. The narrative genius here, according to the sources, is that the author completely avoided sequel fatigue by reversing the power dynamic.
Yes. Tell us more about that reversal, because that's the truly sophisticated move here.
So, in Heated Rivalry, Shane was, without a doubt, the more vulnerable of the two.
For sure.
He was less secure in his sexuality, still figuring himself out, and he really needed Ilya to sort of anchor him.
But by the long game, the roles are completely swapped.
Yeah.
Shane is now out as gay to his teammates. He has this level of professional and personal security.
But Ilya...
Ilya is now the emotionally vulnerable one. He's the one who has to maintain the lie, which separates him from the support network that Shane now enjoys. Plus, he took a serious hit to his career, moving down to a less competitive team in Ottawa.
And crucially, the vulnerability isn't just emotional, it's existential.
That's a great way to put it. Shane is a Canadian citizen with a strong family base nearby. Ilya is an immigrant.
And the reviewers highlighted that. His fears are deeply practical. He's worried about deportation if his career falters. He's afraid of losing Shane's parents, who've basically adopted him, if the relationship were to end.
So the weight of the secret is just compounded by his lack of a safety net.
Wow, that is a heavy pivot. It elevates the conflict way beyond just will they get caught to can this relationship even survive when one partner has literally everything to lose?
And that isolation is central to his arc in this book.
Yeah.
Ilya used to be the life of the party, a party animal. Now he's living this quiet, incredibly lonely life. He's described as a very tactile person, and the forces noted how desperately lonely he is for meaningful emotional and physical touch, outside of the few moments he can steal with Shane.
That's why he ends up stealing every scene he's in, that depth.
Speaking of depth, the core conflict moves past the secret itself and dives straight into mental health. The central question of the book really becomes, how can they make this relationship healthy and safe for both of them?
And the private price Ilya is paying for all this secrecy, it manifests as depression. He starts losing his enjoyment of hockey, and he has this fear that he's reliving a family tragedy. His mother died by suicide.
And he keeps these issues deeply private, mostly hidden from Shane.
And this is where we see that initial reader frustration that the reviewers were quick to address. It's easy at first to just dismiss Shane as oblivious.
Taking Ilya for granted, being too focused on hockey.
Exactly. He sees Ilya as this pillar of inherent strength and toughness.
But the sources really defended Shane's blindness. They argued that it was a deliberate and I think realistic portrayal of how depression works. Ilya was actively hiding his symptoms.
The fatigue, the loneliness on the road, the bad dreams about his mother.
Right. The narrative holds that it is tragically authentic to hide depression, even for the person you're closest to.
And the representation of that depression was what earned the book such incredibly high praise. It wasn't portrayed as some cinematic sadness.
No, it covered the accompanying symptoms that often go unmentioned. The paralyzing fatigue, the immense effort it takes just to put on a smile for the public, the feeling of total isolation, and that warped, distorted thinking that comes with the illness.
And this is the critical distinction. The book made it so clear that love was not a cure.
No. Ilya sought therapy and was portrayed not as a quick fix, but as an ongoing, maybe even chronic, journey that requires consistent management. This really resonated with one reviewer who quoted Ilya's therapist, underscoring the cultural hurdles. Mental health is not a main concern of our people.
That acknowledgement of a chronic struggle is a heavy pivot for a romance novel. That tension, the real dread that the strain of the secrecy and the depression would lead to a genuine, permanent split.
It was expertly handled. Reviewers describe the atmosphere as delicious and tight as a bowstring. The book successfully tests their partnership on a structural level.
It's the highest form of conflict in a romance sequel, I think. The whole structure reframes what a happy ending is. It's not just public acceptance, it's achieving sustainable mental well-being within the relationship.
So let's talk resolution. The central climax is, of course, the public commitment. Shane and Ilya finally coming out as a couple.
Resolving that huge missing piece from the original Happily Ever After. And the event that triggers it is a true game changer, one that readers of Role Model would recognize.
And what's impressive about the plotting here is that the person who makes that decisive public move was actually a surprise to some of the reviewers, which shows how effectively the author used the secondary characters and the established world.
Oh, we absolutely have to talk about the secondary characters. Yes. Shane's parents were highlighted again and again. They basically adopt Ilya, and during a crisis, Shane's mother delivers some relationship advice that was described as pure gold.
And of course, Svetlana, Ilya's former sex buddy.
Svetlana.
She was such a compelling figure that one reviewer immediately demanded a whole book about her, Which, I mean, that just speaks volumes about the quality of the world building.
It really does. Now, we do need to address a point of significant critical debate that the sources unearthed: the sex scenes.
Ah, yes. The debate.
One reviewer felt there was a little too much sex. They argued it slowed the pace and delayed the meat of the story, the emotional and coming out plots.
But the majority of the analysis strongly disagreed with that.
Strongly.
They argued that the sexual connection was absolutely vital to the narrative. They maintained the sex scenes were rooted in their emotional connection and served a specific character function. For Ilya, sex was his primary way of receiving validation and security when everything else in his life was precarious and a lie.
So it wasn't filler, it was the rock-solid part of the relationship that kept him anchored. That's a really important distinction.
It is. Even when Shane was slow to recognize Ilya's emotional needs outside the bedroom, he was always focused and available in it. It was the only space where Ilya truly felt seen and in control.
And the consensus points to that scene in the trophy room as a fantastic example of using sex to develop trust and character depth.
This whole debate leads us perfectly into a fascinating genre deep dive that the sources provided. They laid out a critical distinction within romance categories.
Okay.
The difference between genre romance and queer romance, LGBTQ plus romance.
Yeah.
The sources categorized the long game firmly in the genre romance camp.
And how did they define that?
It's seen as originating largely from fan fiction, often features cis, gay, or bi men, and is highly stylized and heavily tropey. It follows established conventions like, forced proximity, and it has a definitive commitment to monogamy and a guaranteed happy ending.
Right, that emphasis on tropey and stylized is key. So, for example, the automatic assumption that Shane and Ilya must be monogamous, or that the sequel must end with public acceptance, that all fits within those genre conventions.
Exactly, whereas the queer romance category is typically broader. It embraces more grounded reality, features wider representation trans, non-binary, polyamory, and often challenges those conventions. By identifying the long game as genre romance, the sources give you a framework for understanding the expectations and stylistic choices the author was working with.
And yet, despite being in that highly stylized framework, the book still managed to tackle something so profoundly real and complex and, non-tropey. Which just brings us back to that incredible balancing act.
What does this all mean?
Our synthesis shows that the long game was successful far beyond just delivering the expected sequel beats. It evolved the narrative from a simple secret rivalry hook to an exploration of the challenging commitment required to sustain a relationship under immense pressure.
All while tackling serious issues like chronic depression and the emotional cost of a public lie.
It delivered an emotional journey that significantly deepened characters we thought we already knew. The fact that the joint reviewers awarded it 3 straight A grades confirms its status.
It really proved that a sequel to a beloved book can not only meet sky-high expectations, but actively enrich and complicate the original story.
And here's a final provocative thought for you. The sources reveal a fascinating tension. The long game successfully integrated the authentic, chronic struggle of mental illness, a narrative that inherently lacks easy, immediate answers within the often stylized, convention-driven framework of romance fiction, which traditionally promises a definitive happily ever after.
Which raises the question for you. How does the inclusion of complex real-world struggles redefine the promise and maybe the limitations of the happy ending in popular fiction, and does it demand more from the genre moving forward?